Good evening, everyone. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I am very excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dr. Nancy Burgoyne and Dr. Maru Torres-Gregory. Thank you for attending. We're a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among many others. We have over 125 videos of past events archived on our website and on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now for my formal introductions. Nancy Burgoyne is the Chief Clinical Officer at the Family Institute at Northwestern University and a licensed clinical psychologist and a family therapist. She is part of the teaching faculty in the Marriage and Family Therapy program in the Center for Applied Psychological and Family Studies at Northwestern. Her clinical interests include life stage transitions, including adolescent adjustment, emerging adults, adult children and parent relationship issues, personal, existential, and identity exploration, cultural transition, systemically focused family of origin work, families with chronically mentally ill members, divorce recovery, and post-divorce co-parenting. Maru Torres-Gregory is a core faculty member of the Marriage and Family Therapy program at the Family Institute. Dr. Torres-Gregory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with extensive experience working with couples, adults, young adults, adolescents, and families. In her practice, she assists clients struggling with individual and interpersonal issues arising from couple marital distress, self-confidence, perfectionism, body image, disordered eating, self-harm, cultural differences, among others. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Torres-Gregory has a passion for training future marriage and family therapists. She has served as a clinical supervisor and faculty instructor in the Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy program for over 8 years. And it's now my pleasure to introduce both Dr. Burgoyne and Dr. Torres-Gregory.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us. And welcome to everybody. We are here. We know, first of all, in spite of our title, we do know that we are still in the pandemic. I suppose we were hopeful when we crafted that title initially, but we absolutely know that we are in it. And we're here as Maru and I have come to think of it from the emotional front lines of the pandemic. We are clinicians in a large practice. Maru and I have been walking the journey of the pandemic with our clients, alongside our colleagues, to whom we're very grateful, and their insights are included in our thoughts tonight. And of course, we've been on this journey ourselves, which is somewhat unusual for clinicians to be walking the same journey at the same time as their clients. So we are in it. And when you're on the front lines of something in a professional role, we have a sense of responsibility to shine a light on the path ahead, to make the journey more productive, to make the journey more helpful, especially given how incredibly difficult of a journey it's been. And so our sense, despite all that we've missed in this pandemic, and we've missed a lot, and there's so much that we'll want to reclaim. It's also true, our sense is that there's no going back. Too much has been exposed. It's not going to be so much about reclaiming, but about claiming, about knowing what the pandemic has exposed and stepping into that in a thoughtful way and claiming what we value and what we need. And we've had many, many questions from you, and we appreciate those.
Mm-hmm. And what we did was that in advance of the event, we shared several links with FAN, who will be sharing those links with you throughout our conversation tonight. And those links, we think, answer or address a lot of the questions, very specific questions that you asked us. Our goal tonight is to be expansive rather than prescriptive. We're not here to give you a how-to, but we'll go on this journey with you and talk about things that we feel you need to think about to expand your perspectives. And we also, as we start, we want to punctuate that the stories and the themes that we're sharing with you tonight are not client specific. Yes, they arise from our work with our clients in our experiences in clinical practice, but they are more an aggregate of what we have learned in our experiences and what we have lived as human beings going through this pandemic.
Yeah, that's really important. We know that the how-tos are come from the most earnest of places, and we're hoping that some of what we offer responds to that without being so, as Maru said, so prescriptive. So as part of the Family Institute, which is an organization that weaves academics, research, and scholarship with clinical practice, they all sort of speak to each other. So coming from that scientifically informed place, we thought it was really important to take a moment to cite some research just that speaks a little bit to the impact of the pandemic. I don't think this will come as a surprise to you, but I think it's useful to take a moment to look at the empirical literature. So since 2007, the American Psychological Association has surveyed people across the United States about their stress, its sources, its intensity, and how people are responding, both mentally and physically. It'll come as no surprise to you that the 2020 findings were quite different than those in years prior. But what was interesting about those findings is that they not only addressed the pandemic, but they showed, unlike prior years, that the things that had been troubling people in the United States for many years continue to trouble people and have compounded the stress of the pandemic: education, healthcare, racism, climate change, the economy. All of these compounding effects of stress have had a very significant impact on the physical and mental health of folks in the United States, and no doubt around the world. We know that stress is a mediating variable for health conditions of all kinds. So when the American Psychological Association reports these kinds of findings, it's quite alarming. And in fact, they sounded a very significant alarm, and I'm going to quote this. We're facing a national mental health crisis that could yield serious health and social consequences for years to come. Nearly two of three adults in the United States, 65%, say the current amount of uncertainty in their lives feels overwhelming. And we know that certain populations are suffering more than others. We know that parents, for example, are bearing an enormous burden during the pandemic. We know that people of color are bearing an enormous burden, adding to minority stress and racism, the extraordinary health disparities that are laid in stark relief during the pandemic. And we know that Generation Z, teens, age 13 to 17, and their young adult generation mates, 18 to 23, are facing unprecedented uncertainty. They're experiencing elevated levels of stress, and they're already reporting higher levels of depression, which we've already seen in the last number of years increasing at a significant rate. So I know that Anne-Marie put the link to the survey in the chat, which is great, because the other advantage of this link is, in addition to reporting on these worrisome findings, it has some very useful, empirically validated suggestions for how to respond. So these vulnerabilities that were being discussed in this survey, we're really talking about individuals. But at the Family Institute, we're also concerned about couples and families. And Maru, you're a rockin' couples therapist, so
Thank you.
So you can address the couples piece empirically.
So when the pandemic started, there was a lot of speculation about how intimate relationships will be impacted by the confinement. And as of today, we don't have up-to-date data. We have some data from the beginning of the pandemic, but we don't know how relevant that is anymore after a year into this confinement. What we do know is that, as Nancy was saying, the stress in the home, the distribution of tasks in the home, particularly e-learning, has fallen mostly on women. And at least in heterosexual relationships, that has increased the stress levels and feelings of inequity in those relationships. And from the literature, we know that lack of equity in intimate relationships affects relationship quality, stability, and satisfaction. So we don't have black and white answers yet about how the pandemic has affected long-term intimate relationships. So it's still, we have to wait and see.
Yeah. Literature always takes a while to catch up because of the process that's involved in getting literature published, right? So we're not quite there yet empirically.
Yeah, there's some literature, some studies that say that at the beginning, at least as of March and April, on average, relationship satisfaction remained stable for couples who were already generally satisfied, but that's in March and April of last year. We don't have newer data, but there's also data that says that couples who were already high conflict and had low coping mechanisms, their relationship satisfaction decreased. So we are assuming that with the prolonged, maybe that data will change. Though when they do more studies and more surveys, we will learn a lot more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this journey, as we've been talking about it, this journey through the pandemic, it's obviously been dramatic, as demonstrated through research findings, but also through felt experience. And it's involved some really well-worn trails, right? Things that no doubt you've read about and you've heard about and you've thought about. Many speakers before us have addressed these themes of loss and grief, unprecedented loss and grief, of powerlessness and loss of control, of the paradox of isolation and crowding, of exhaustion, of boredom, of suffering, of resilience. So how we navigate these going forward, that requires us to step into something that's different than how we typically approach things. As family therapists, when you become a family therapist, they give you a t-shirt. And in the front, it says, go figure. And in the back, it says, both things are true. And you'll always hear a family therapist talking about both things being true. And Maru does a really nice job talking about how these dualities and stepping into these dualities really give us access to what's useful for us in the pandemic.
So when Nancy and I were thinking about this journey that we have been going on, and how we navigate through the now, as we think about hopefully the future post-pandemic as well, even though we know there's still a ways to get there. We thought of two basic metaphors. We thought of the idea of a map, and we thought of the journey of immigrants and the journey when someone moves. It doesn't just have to be an immigrant, but someone, maybe you move from one state or one city to the other. And when that happens, there's a lot of dualities in that process. There's a lot of loss, but there's a lot of opportunity as well. And when we thought of the map, there's three things when we think about a map that you need to know. You need to know where you are, you need to know where you want to go, and you need to know how you want to get there. So as we review where we are right now, we want to help you think of different ways of getting there, whatever the there will be post-pandemic. So we think also of the concept of equifinality. I think tonight will be about equifinality. That's the notion that there are multiple ways to get to the same endpoint, which is debatable too, because our endpoints may be different. But thinking of the endpoint tonight is post-pandemic. So back to the dualities. That's the overarching theme that has been the most salient to us, and that both and some of the dualities that we have identified through our work and through our experiences, and you may have others that you would add to the list, are that first one, loss and opportunity. So COVID has forced us to go in this journey with countless levels of loss, but with that, and because they're countless, we're not going to name them right now, but there's also been a lot of opportunity as well. We have learned new ways of working. We have learned new ways of connecting and relating. We have learned new ways of growing and learning and of existing in our personal spaces, right? There's also been a lot of anxiety, and with that anxiety, we've also felt relief. And anxiety is self-explanatory, but with the anxiety, we've also felt relief in affording ourselves and each other the grace to not be perfect, to be creative, and at the risk of sounding cheesy, of making lemonade, right? We keep being bombarded with lemons, and we're making lemonade, right? We also thought of guilt and gratitude. So those of us who have been able to continue working, of getting a paycheck, of providing for our families, and also those who have remained healthy and safe, we have felt immense gratitude, but also very strong feelings of guilt when we think about our fellow human beings who have not had the same experiences as us. Nancy was talking about isolation and crowding, that also we think about individuality and togetherness. It's a different way of saying the same thing. So part of what couples and families are seeing in this process is the blessing of being able to spend so much time together. At least I was excited, me personally was excited at the beginning of the pandemic, of all the time that I would get to spend with my husband and my kids. But there's such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? So a little time apart never hurts anyone right now. And it sounds good at times, and that's okay. We don't need to feel guilty about that, because part of what the pandemic has done is time and space have become very diffuse. The natural ebbs and flows of the goodbyes and the coming back together that we have every single day with our family members and our partners, many of us are not having, because we're all confined in the same space almost 24/7. We also think of safety and threat. And this reminds me a lot of the journey of an immigrant, because sometimes the same behavior can bring rewards, but also a lot of penalties. And in the context of the pandemic, that is very salient for all of us, because the same things that we would think that we need for our mental health and our emotional health could bring a lot of penalties. So for example, physical touch, social proximity, seeing our family members, all of those we need for our mental health, but they could also render us sick right now. So we invite you to think about these dualities as you think about what you could learn about yourself, your needs, and your post-pandemic self, given what all of these dualities and any others that you could think of have exposed for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. You know, Maru, when you're talking about dualities, many things being true simultaneously, it can really sometimes feel like you're going in circles if you feel like the job is to pick, right? Is to figure out where you stand so that you can land, because it's so uncomfortable sometimes to be rocking back and forth between multiple things being true at the same time. But it's not our job to pick, actually. Psychologically, emotionally, our job is about acceptance. Our job is tolerating the dualities that Maru was talking about for a very specific reason. Because in the process of going back and forth from knowing this and hearing this and touching this and feeling that, that process puts us in touch with different parts of ourselves that have different needs. And as we access those needs and access those core needs, there are lessons in that. And there are lessons in the pandemic that we can benefit from, but we can't benefit from them if we want to foreclose on the dualities too soon. We have to stand in the discomfort and in the complexity in order to make use of it. That's the heart of therapy, I think, is to help people stand in the complexity. But not everybody appropriately is in therapy. Not everybody is doing that right now for themselves. And so you can take that on for yourself by giving yourself that permission to have that both and. So post-pandemic, hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later, is going to be about how well we listened to those needs and what we claim going forward. And I'm thinking of many, many examples. I'm thinking of the person who has it all figured out or had it all figured out pre-pandemic, or so they felt, and now they feel lost. Their life was organized by going and doing and achieving, and I say that with no disrespect whatsoever. But in the silence and the stillness that came with the pandemic, they didn't like what they felt, and they didn't like what they heard from themselves. I've heard countless people say to me, I'm tired, and I didn't know I was tired like this until I stopped. I didn't know I was this tired until I stopped, because the conveyor belt of going and doing kept me on track with my to-do list, but the pause put me in touch with other feelings. Other folks saying, I'm confused. Do I miss what I was doing? Or do I miss the approval? Do I miss the jolt of the spark? What is it that I'm missing? Tuning into that, asking their questions. Who am I? When no one is shining a light on me. The light that I get from going and doing and achieving all the time. I'm thinking of the person who has settled in their job or in their relationship. They decided for a period of time that it was good enough. It was good enough. But in the pandemic, in the proximity, in the reflection, again, in the quiet and in the stillness, it's not enough anymore. There's nothing to distract from the emptiness that's there. But what's in the emptiness? What's the need in the emptiness? When someone says to me, I feel empty, I want to dig into that a little bit. What's the need under that? Is it a need for connection? Perhaps. Maybe it's a need for a kind of safety that you don't have. Maybe it's a need for respect, for fairness, for equity that you don't have in those spaces. I'm thinking of other examples of parents who've been taken to their knees by the demands of trying to work and school their children and run their homes during the pandemic. And what they face in the dilemmas of whether or not they want to let go or try harder or do more or do it faster. And this is a dilemma that many working parents face on a regular basis, but the pandemic has brought it to a crisis stage. And that puts them in touch with things that they want to tune into and that they're missing. I'm thinking a lot, in part because it's big part of my practice, and also because I have kids in this age group, but I'm thinking a lot about college students and high school students, the Gen Zers that I referred to earlier in the APA survey, who no longer trust that the future will unfold as it was expected to. And they're wrestling with tremendous disappointment at the milestones they've missed, and also tremendous disappointment at the way that the world is right now, and how unpredictable and how unreliable and how unsafe it feels to them. And it turns out that unlike adults, kids don't respond well to the "this too shall pass" message. So I really encourage you, if you're thinking about giving that message to a teenager or to someone who's college age, a Gen Z person, if you're thinking about telling them that this too shall pass, I would suggest that you refrain from doing that. That's not a message that kids respond well to. What kids need to do in this age range is they really need to identify what they care about, what they respect, and what they want to emulate. Their path needs to be like all of our paths, but kids most especially, their path needs to be aligned with their values. So we help kids through the pandemic when we use it as sort of a values clarification exercise. What matters to you? What are you paying attention to? What do you need? What do you miss? What does it represent to you? These are really fruitful conversations that bear fruit with kids.
Nancy, if I may, you're making me think of and I'm thinking of Brene Brown's work, and I think about the importance of when someone comes to us, when our kids come to us with their frustrations, the anxieties, the vulnerabilities, for us to just sit in the discomfort of having to listen and pay attention to those vulnerabilities instead of silver lining, instead of trying to get to solutions too quickly. We have to sit there, and part of that is we have to face our own discomfort in that space because we want to make them feel better. And right now it's very hard. And part of the journey that they have to go, regardless of the pandemic, not just now, is that discovery of what their values are, what they believe in, how to problem solve themselves. And sometimes just sitting in that discomfort with them can be so valuable.
Yeah, so well said. And I know parents, we're just so eager, right? We're so eager to step in and give them answers and give them quick guidance and tell them it's going to be fine. There's a way to reassure that you're going to be there, that you're going to walk with them, that you have faith that they'll be able to find their way through without minimizing the distress that they're in. The Family Institute. Exactly. We'll have Anne-Marie put in the chat some of the resources for kids and young adults that our colleagues at the Family Institute have put together. And hopefully some of those will be useful to you. Other things along these lines. I mean, I'm thinking about how our bodies have aged at an accelerated rate during the pandemic. I had a friend who I hadn't heard from in a long time call me up and say, so how are you doing? How are you doing in the pandemic? And I said, well, you mean other than aging in dog years? I think, doing okay. And it kind of feels like that, right? Stress, illness, grief, all of these things have been accelerated during the pandemic, not to mention sort of lack of access to the hairdresser and so forth. Which seems silly, but it tunes us into our self-consciousness and to the needs underneath, the needs for approval, the needs for self-acceptance, all of these needs that some of them come from culture, of course, but some of them come from self. And teasing those out and looking at those is a surprising opportunity that I hadn't really thought of in the pandemic, but it's been, I know Maru and I have talked about this quite a bit with great humor, of course, but also with great seriousness. Another thing that Maru and I were talking about just yesterday that we've heard from our clients, which we think it seems so passing, but it's so telling, is that people are now missing their drives to work. They're missing their commutes. And when you dig into that a little bit and you ask people about that, what do you miss? Well, that's when I listen to my music. That's when I listen to my books. Well, that's when I talk to my sister for an hour without anybody in the background giving me grief for it. That's when I listened to the music that I grew up with and I danced like a maniac in my car. That's when, right? And that's when you get under the surface, it's a space of autonomy, of agency, where you choose what you're going to do and you express yourself in that. And the expression in that moment, in that space, that's a need. How is that going to be claimed? How are you going to draw a boundary around that going forward? These things that are passing are telling us something that are so useful for us to be paying attention to. As therapists, we have, all kinds of opportunity to have these conversations, but you may have fewer.
And sorry, Nancy, to interrupt you, but it makes me think also of the markers of time. Like when kids are in school, the bell rings and they know, well, I think the bell still rings, and they know they have to switch classrooms, or this lesson is over and I'm switching to another topic. For many of us, that's our commute.
Yes.
And we don't have any of that. So one thing that we have had to negotiate is, how do we have those transitions? At least for us, we need to, and I think not just therapists, but many people, depending on what they do, they truly need that time and that space to decompress, so that when they get home, they can be present and engaged and available to their family members. And that is gone. I never thought that I would miss my commute, but a lot of what I miss of my commute is that space of decompression, of connection. That's when I talk to my friends. Right. I talk to my friends and I talk to my mom, and and I just leave work out and step into my space as a mom and as a wife and as a human being in my own space.
It's not something we think about, the value of transitions and intentionality around our transitions and how we move into a space and out of a space. We know from providing teletherapy, we try to counsel our clients to move in, to create some space before and after the teletherapy session, because that used to be built into the sequence of therapy, but it is no longer. So, okay, so we're stepping into dualities, we're defining our core needs. It can feel a little bit like a hot mess, right? It can feel like an awful lot to stand in the face of. And I know Maru has a really beautiful way that going forward, I'm going to pilfer of helping clients and helping all of us sort of navigate this kind of complexity. And she calls it the 3 S's.
Those are my 3 S's. And by the way, Nancy, you're great for my self-esteem. We need to do this more often. When I very frequently talk to my clients about when either they're dealing with internal conflict or when they're dealing with conflict with others or any type of adversity, to think about the 3 S's, like Nancy said. And the 3 S's, as I see them, are slow down, simplify, and stay present. And with the pandemic, we have been forced to do this, to do the slowing down, to simplifying, and to staying present. But I don't see it just as being forced to do it. I think that it's an opportunity. And I hear that from my clients. This has forced me to slow down. This has forced me to slow down. So let's harness it and let's see it as an opportunity. So let's break it down. When I think about slowing down, I think about you having the opportunity to be more intentional. Be intentional in your responses to other people and to situations. We usually are very reactive, and our society values quick wit and quick thinking. But sometimes what the precise thing that we need to do is to slow down so that we can think and feel and decide on a preferred course of action instead of boom, being very reactive and very quick. I remember one of my supervisors, I was going to say supervisors growing up as a therapist, he would sit and you could almost feel the thinking and the intentionality because he gave himself all that time so that he could be very intentional and very measured in the responses. And that, I think we need more of that. We need to give ourselves permission to do that. And it's not at times valued very highly in our society, but I think it's very important for us to do. Because we don't want to regret our reactions later on. When I think about staying present, and I'm switching the order a little bit here, but when I think about staying present, I think of allowing yourself the opportunity to experience the moment right now, instead of remaining stuck in the pain of the past or in the uncertainty of the future. And I think that we have to look at the past so that those experiences and that wisdom can inform our now and our future, but not staying stuck back there, and not only be thinking and worrying about the uncertainty of the future, which we can't control. We can predict, but we need to be here now so that we can experience the right now before doing either one. And then when I think of simplifying, I think of going back to the basics and being honest about how we stand in our present. And I think that the pandemic has highlighted how lofty goals can be great, but sometimes what we really need is very much more simple and basic. When this whole thing started, everyone was being bombarded with all this advice to harness the moment, learn a new language, learn a new skill, write 20 journal articles, and that's talking more about us, read a book a month, become highly skilled chefs, have your best body ever because you have all this time at home to work out. As you continued working, you became instructors, educators to your children, and we lost most of our coping mechanisms, right? And what we were talking about, that's that time to ourselves. We lost all of that and our usual coping mechanisms, our connections with others. So I think that what ended up really happening is that we have to become much more focused on more basic survival tactics and core needs. When you think about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when the pandemic started, we were getting a lot of advice on the top, self-actualization, but not so slowly, I think very quickly, we went much more basic. We went down because our safety, our feelings of safety, our connections, all of that was getting threatened. Our livelihood, for many of us, our health. So we had to go down that hierarchy very, very quickly. I think that's why, and Nancy and I were joking about this, that yarn storms and the ran out of yarn and the supermarket ran out of yeast. And that's not because we're up here self-actualizing, that's because we need comfort. And going back to those basics, we had to adjust to new working environments. We had to adjust to a slower pace of life. And we had to find comfort in our homes in ways we never had to. My husband and I were looking for outdoor like patio furniture. We couldn't find anywhere because we're stuck at home. That this was back in the summer. Everyone was doing the same thing. We're trying to make our homes more comfortable because we're in it in ways that we had never had that opportunity to enjoy our homes, but we couldn't get out either. So going back to basics. And as we think of going forward, think of the value of being responsive instead of reactive. When you slow down, think of being focused in the present moment, and particularly of going back to basics and where you turn to for comfort, for growth, and for redefining what you value and what you need. Because many of the things that we thought we hated in our pre-pandemic lives, we miss now. Like Nancy was saying, I miss my commute. I am a very spontaneous person, and it may sound like a paradox, but that's part of the duality that we feel here. I miss being spontaneous when I have to be intentional and planned every single day. I miss running into people. I just want to run into someone and give them a hug. It's something very basic, that need for human closeness and warmth and comfort. So our invitation to you is to embrace this opportunity now and to apply it going forward as well. Because slowing down, simplifying, and staying present can help you tolerate the complexity of all those dualities that we talked about and tune into what matters most for you and to your core needs. And I think Nancy's gonna take it now.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was thinking about that when you were describing those 3 S's, is that if we're shining a light on the path forward, that process of simplifying, slowing down, staying present, that process is what's going to give you access to moving into the dualities and identifying the core needs and giving you room for acceptance of both and. So our core needs, we're going to, there are going to be some that we've neglected that we need to reclaim, but there may be many that have surfaced in the pandemic that now we need to claim in a more intentional way, and I would say put a boundary around. For some folks, it's solitude in the context of much crowding. For some, it's more play. For some, it's more connection. They feel disconnected, even in the context of living in a global common story. For many, the reality of losing rituals, the extensive loss of rituals, holidays, graduations, funerals, wakes, all those places that create community and that we move in and out of very automatically. And the intentionality about moving ritual into your life, not just around those things, but around other things, because you can see the value of them. Of agency, of places to have freedom and autonomy, places to have surrender and to not have to do so much all of the time, which is very countercultural for many ethnicities within the United States anyway. And then there's that likely universal need that we're feeling very intensely in the pandemic now, and that's the need for hope. And the survey that I referred to earlier surprisingly said that in spite of all the stress, 7 of 10 respondents said that they remain hopeful about the future. And I know, Maru, you've been paying attention to how some folks are talking more productively about hope than just naming it.
Right. So one key way to work on our mental health in times of adversity is to remain hopeful. And I was reading by this the last name is Griffith. He's from GW University in Washington, D.C. on his hope modules. And it's about working to combat demoralization in people with chronic illness. And I think the chronicity of the situation we find ourselves in lends itself to using some of that. And I love how he talks about hope as action. He talks about performing hope as opposed to hope being just a feeling. And one way in which we can think of hope as action is to change the questions that we ask ourselves. So instead of asking yourself, how has this affected me? We're inviting you to ask yourself, how have I responded? How would I like to respond right now? And how would I like to respond post-pandemic? What can I learn about myself from my responses? What works for me or what doesn't work for me? And we invite you to look inwardly as opposed to looking sideways at what works for other people, because what could work for me may not work for Nancy. And we believe that by doing this, you'll be putting yourself in a position of agency, and we need to feel agency. There's a lot of powerlessness that we have been feeling throughout this past year, and that can be debilitating. So we need to be in a position of agency, of finding new meanings. That is essential in recovering hope and recovering from loss, and performing hope as you reprioritize and you reevaluate and redefine what matters now to you and what comes next would be. And just to leave you with a final thought, unless Nancy, there's something else you want to add. one must face, embrace, and engage adversity instead of avoiding it, submitting to it, or withdrawing from it in order to practice hope. So our hope is that you can practice hope in your own way as we move forward and hopefully get out of this soon as we can. So on behalf of myself and of Nancy, thank you so much. And I believe Lonnie will be here soon.
Here I am.
There
That
you
was
are.
lovely. Thank you for that conversation. It was very thought-provoking. And Maru, I really liked where you ended about performing hope. That was a very interesting. Can you, do you know the last name of the person at GW again? You
Griffith.
said Griffith? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take, did you give us a link for that ahead of time? Because if not, I'll look it up.
Yeah, I didn't, because it's an article written for therapists.
I see.
But we can share the article with you. I can share a PDF of the article with you.
I can also research and try to find maybe something that because that's a great concept, and I'm sure other people felt the same way. So I'm gonna pivot to a couple attendee questions, and I'm gonna just start with the upvote. Krista asks, how do the stressors differ for those who are frontline workers who do not have the privilege to work from home? If you have thoughts, I'm sure you have some clients that are not able to stay at home.
Sure. I mean, I'll say a few things. I have plenty of clients who are not able to stay at home. Physicians, folks who deliver mail and deliver packages, and folks that are working in grocery stores, and their experience, their need in many ways to make it not such a big deal takes a lot of energy. And that's my experience, is that it takes a lot of energy. And then the sense of unfairness about it and fear about it comes crashing through. And so there's a lot of whiplash in that experience of, I'm good because I need to be, and then boom, it's very, very demanding, and it takes a lot of support and a lot of energy. And my counsel around this has always been, you're doing enough. If you're doing that, you're doing enough. Yeah, Maru, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, it makes me think of compassion fatigue.
Yes.
And how when you give yourself so fully and so freely in order to help someone else, it takes a toll on you. And we are seeing that. There's a lot of people reevaluating. And that's when that gives me, it makes me sad, but at the same time, I understand it. Yeah. Because there can be just too much giving, and you need to protect yourself and protect your family as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a very difficult position to be in, and we're very, very grateful for them.
Very.
So Manuel put in a question here. He says, with respect to teenagers and young adults, it is better to listen than to try to console. And I think that was an interesting little differentiation that you have there when you're talking with teens about trying to make them feel better, as opposed to doing a more full-on listening mode. It seems to be the piece that he's teasing apart there. Did you have any thoughts, either one of you on that?
Yeah, actually, I think that's really well said. I mean, I think if you're talking to a teenager and you get on this side of the seesaw, they're going to get on the other. And they're going to.
Why is that? No.
Right? They can hear both, but they want to they don't want to feel dismissed, and they so frequently feel dismissed, and they feel frightened and scared about what it is that they know. And so they get on the other side. So I think this impulse to control, or to control certainly, but to console is ill-advised. I think there's a difference between that and validation, which I think is very wise. Mm-hmm. But I just helping kids to think about what's important to you in this. What are you recognizing? It sounds like you feel like something's not fair in this. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Tell me about what you think's not fair in this. Draw out what matters to them without a counterpoint. And that tends to create energy, which is a nice antidote to depressive and anxious thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think also of how we listen and I've mentioned this in other conversations after hours in other events, but I think of listening to understand versus listening to respond. And I think that's especially important when you're talking to teenagers, to listen to understand so that they feel heard. And we also must help them think through and talk through how to feel more agency.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to say, in all honesty, it is a lot easier to do this as a therapist than as a parent. I do have to say that in all honesty. I don't want to sort of feign any sort of a tremendous talent with my own children in this department. So I feel for you parents. It's very hard to do with your own kids. The impulse to fix it for them is so strong.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It reminds me of, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was thinking of a conversation that I had with one of my sons a long time ago when he was in high school, and he said, "What? You're the therapist. Come on, ask me the questions." And I said, "No. I'm not a therapist here. I'm your mom." Yeah. So I'm not thinking as a therapist. It's hard. Sorry, Lonnie, I interrupted you.
No, please, no, I interrupted you. It reminds me of several years ago, we hosted a researcher from the University of Texas, Austin. His name is David Yeager. And David Yeager is a protege of Carol Dweck's, and he does a lot of really interesting research with adolescents, in particular, adolescent development. And I was talking to him about an initiative that I wanted to start with teenagers in FAN, and he said to me, when I was asking him, so if you want to start generating topics with a group of teenagers, topics that could be topics for FAN events, and he said, the number one question, which you will never have a silent room, is to pose a question to teens of, so what's unfair in your life?
Exactly.
And you can look at it from either, and I don't say that in any kind of mocking way, please no.
No,
and so it's everything from what's unfair in your home, in your school, in your community, on your globe, that you can zoom very micro, you can go macro with the topic, because he said that adolescents are highly attuned to the hypocrisy of the adults around them, and are very, very, very perceptive about picking up on, well, we know adult hypocrisy. And so that piece of identifying and responding and feeling unfairness will usually prompt a lot of great questions. So I like that piece about, I started for a couple months, my son's friends, whenever we were in a car together or they were over, if we'd have dinner together, something, I'd say, so what strikes you guys as unfair in your life? And boy, just like, so, I suggest to folks maybe at dinner at some point, maybe just say, so, aside from COVID, what else do we have here? Right. I want to turn to another question. So Lawrence asks, can you speak to the impact of underlying chronic disease in our nation, including chronic behavioral health challenges, which were with us before the pandemic hit? There seems to be a lack of a broader public health conversation regarding chronic health challenges that may have been exacerbated because of the impact of the pandemic. Is there more we should be doing as a nation to build a more proactive, preventive, integrative care model with more mental and physical strength and resilience? Go ahead, either one of you.
Well, I mean, yes, 100 times over, yes. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. We know that mental health problems are amplifiers for physical illness in terms of the cost, both the human cost and the financial cost. Mental health distress worldwide is extraordinary. The World Health Organization launched an initiative back in 2007 attempting to address this at the national level. And the conversation picks up some steam, but per Lawrence's, very true observation, we have a long way to go.
I want to get to a question here from Amy, which I think is popping up a lot, it seems, in some of my friend groups, which is, can you speak to managing the complex emotions that may arise when some family members in one household are able to get vaccinated now, and thus their pandemic worry risk lessens, while others will be likely waiting months for their vaccines, building a gap in their experience and perceived safety, and how that everyone, when there's no vaccine, everyone's kind of in the same suspended animation. But now that has shifted, and I see it in friend groups and families. I wonder if you guys have any comments on that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that I'm thinking of staying the course. I'm thinking of empathy, and I'm thinking of remaining connected to the needs and the vulnerabilities of those other family members. The vaccine doesn't mean that it's over. The vaccine doesn't, there's limitations to the vaccine. So for me, thinking of my family members who have had it and those who haven't, we remain as protective of each other as if we didn't have it. It gives you a little bit more hope that there's an end in sight. But I think it shouldn't change what we do and how we protect each other. Nancy probably have more to say.
No, I don't disagree with you in the slightest. I do think that things like this tend to be keyholes into larger dilemmas family members face with each other. And so if a protective urge might be an impulse for one family, and a sort of every person for themselves might be an impulse for another family. And there can be ethnic and cultural differences with respect to that. So for me, that's a moment of curiosity. That's very interesting how that's playing out. And I feel for the person who's ready to roll and the other people who are pulling back the reins. I feel for that dilemma the family face, but I think it's speaking to something larger would be my opinion.
Just have a couple minutes left. I thought I'd give you 7:58. Why don't I give you a chance to maybe offer a little bit, both of you, your perspectives in terms of from a first person perspective, although I know therapists are loath to do that, but you're not in session right now, so perhaps you'll offer something.
Let's think about it.
That's right. Which is maybe talk a little bit about how your practice as a therapist how it feels to you right now, not the meta report that you figured out, but how does it feel to practice your profession right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to talk about that. I could talk about that for hours, to be honest with you. The transition to teletherapy was difficult at first. I'm speaking just for myself.
Yeah.
Difficult at first because we kind of treated it as waiting for it to be over and to go back. But once we moved through that, and I think we did as a practice, but I certainly did as a therapist, I actually feel like I feel like I'm doing some of the richest work of my life.
Wow.
Because I feel like the pandemic has thrown open the doors and exposed so much, and people are working so hard and being so thoughtful and connecting with things that they hadn't had access to before. The good and the bad news is that pain is very revealing. And it's the great honor of my life, and I say that with complete and total sincerity. It's the great honor of my life to walk with people.
Yeah, I think that I'm sorry, I think that we are getting a window into our clients' lives that otherwise we wouldn't, because we are seeing them at home and they are seeing us at home. I was a skeptic of teletherapy until I had to do it. And I agree with Nancy. It's some of the richest work is going on right now. And my concerns about not being able to connect with clients and join with clients in the way that I do in person, that's not the case, because the need is still there. Yeah.
It's interesting to think, and when we're out of time, so I'll wrap up, but it'll be interesting to see when, now that we can say post-pandemic, at whatever point in months, et cetera, forward, that you can be in session with people face to face again. It'll be interesting to see a perception of what is then, if you will have a perception of a loss of data in some ways, do you know? because there they are. Now you have
Awesome.
the living, breathing human being in front of you, so you also are getting a whole bunch more data. But it's just sort of interesting. Anyway, thank you so much, both to you, Nancy and Maru. It's a pleasure. We love our partnership. FAN loves our partnership with the Family Institute. You have such incredible therapists at all the locations. We've been putting in links to get to the Family Institute, and we'll put some more when we send out the recording. Thank you, everyone, for stopping in. I hope you found some, at least one, maybe two solid nuggets that's going to sit and roll around in your head. So thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate your service to the community. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Maru.
Thank you very much. Thank you
for having us.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Good night.